Her hands would not stop shaking. Rain and mud slicked her knuckles as she pressed her palms together, trying to still them before the man in front of her noticed. He noticed. He always noticed. And when Sergeant Callahan leaned in close enough that she could feel the heat of his breath cutting through the cold morning air, he did not lower his voice for mercy. He raised it for the whole platoon to hear. "Look at this," he barked, pointing at her trembling fingers like they were evidence in a trial. "Look at her hands. You want this soldier next to you when the shooting starts?" Laughter rippled through the men behind him. Some genuine, some just relief that the sergeant's fire wasn't pointed at them today. She said nothing. She only clasped her hands tighter, as if she could crush the shaking out of them by sheer will. "Before I tell you what happened next, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love knowing who's listening." Her name was Reyes, and she had wanted this. This exact mud, this exact rain, this exact life, since she was 14 years old, watching her older brother ship out and never fully come home, not in the ways that mattered. She had trained harder than the recruits, twice her size. She had memorized every manual, every protocol, every worst-case scenario until they lived behind her eyes like ghosts. But nothing in any manual had taught her what to do about her hands. They shook when she was tired. They shook when she was afraid. And worst of all, they shook when everyone was watching, which meant the men around her had already decided who she was before she'd fired a single shot in anger. She thought about quitting that night, lying in the dark of the barracks listening to rain hammer the canvas above her. She thought about the easy dignity of walking away before anyone could push her out. But somewhere beneath the humiliation, a quieter voice kept asking her a different question, not whether she was strong enough, but whether strength had ever really been about steadiness at all. The exercise the next morning was supposed to be routine. A simulated extraction, 3 miles through wooded terrain, live rounds fired at a safe distance to simulate the chaos of real contact. Routine, until the earth gave way beneath a supply truck crossing the ravine, and routine became something else entirely. The truck rolled once, twice, then came to rest against a shattered pine, its cab crushed inward, 3 men trapped inside with the smell of fuel already thick in the air. The forest went silent in that particular way forests do right before something terrible or something heroic happens. Birds gone quiet, wind holding its breath, only the low groan of settling metal and one man's muffled cry from inside the wreckage. Sergeant Callahan was 40 yards back, radio in hand, shouting for support that was still 6 minutes out. 6 minutes that fuel and fire do not wait for. Reyes did not remember deciding to run. She remembered only the mud under her boots and the heat radiating from the truck's crumpled hood, and her hands. Those same hands that had betrayed her on the parade ground, finding the jammed door handle and pulling with everything she had. It would not give. She thought she'd never get it open. She was wrong. She braced her boot against the frame and pulled until her shoulder screamed, until the door tore loose with a shriek of metal, and she reached into the wreckage for the first man, hauling him out by the collar of his jacket as fuel pooled dark beneath the cab. The second man was pinned by a fallen equipment rack. She didn't think, didn't hesitate, just wedged her whole body into the gap and lifted until something in her back protested, and she lifted anyway. The third man was unconscious, wedged against the dashboard, and by then the platoon had reached the ravine, and hands, dozens of them, joined hers, a tide of soldiers moving in the same desperate rhythm, pulling, bracing, carrying, until all 3 men lay gasping in the wet grass just as the fuel line finally caught and the truck went up behind them in a wall of orange heat. For a long moment nobody spoke. The rain hissed against the flames. And then someone noticed what Reyes hadn't. Her hands, wrapped around the wrist of the man she'd just saved, were perfectly, impossibly still. There is a moral tension worth sitting with here. The same platoon that had laughed at her fear just one day earlier now stood in complete, humbled silence, forced to reckon with how easily they had mistaken a nervous system for a character flaw, how quickly cruelty disguised itself as toughening someone up. Sergeant Callahan walked toward her through the smoke, and for the first time since she'd arrived, his voice was quiet. He didn't apologize with words. He simply extended his hand, and when she took it, his did not shake at all, but for once, that didn't matter. Because courage was never about steady hands. It was about what those hands were willing to do while they trembled. Because kindness doesn't vanish. It waits, and it finds its way back, sometimes in the shape of a mocked recruit becoming the reason 3 families still have someone to come home to. And somewhere in that ravine, beneath the smoke and the rain, a shaking pair of hands finally understood what they had always been capable of. If this story moved you, tell us in the comments what courage means to you. We read every single one. And if you believe the quiet ones deserve to be seen, subscribe, because we're just getting started telling their stories.